The Galactic Alliance chamber was built to make smaller species feel insignificant. The ceiling stretched so high it disappeared into artificial stars. Flags and symbols of ancient empires floated in slow circles, glowing softly, reminding everyone who held power. On this day, the chamber was full, louder than usual, filled with confidence and mockery. At the center stood the subject of judgment, humanity. A simple platform held the human delegation. No decorations. No guards in shining armor. Just men and women in plain dark uniforms, standing straight, hands at their sides, faces calm. Above them, massive screens displayed images chosen carefully by the Alliance. Old footage of Earth ships, slower than modern galactic cruisers. Small fleets compared to the massive armadas of elder races. Human cities shown during protests and political arguments, edited to look chaotic and divided. Alien leaders took turns speaking, their voices filled with amusement. One called humans emotional and unstable, claiming they fought among themselves too much to ever stand united. Another laughed and said humanity relied on luck, not strategy. A third dismissed Earth as outdated, a species that had peaked too early and refused to accept its place. Each insult was followed by laughter. Some representatives clapped. Others leaned back comfortably, enjoying the show. This was not a trial. It was a decision already made. When the Alliance speaker finally addressed the humans, the tone was sharp but smug. Humanity was accused of being a risk to galactic stability. No real evidence was presented. It was not needed. The vote followed quickly. Sanctions approved. Trade routes cut. Human colonies near Alliance space declared unsupported and isolated. The speaker announced that humanity would be restricted for the safety of the galaxy. Cameras turned toward the human delegates, waiting for anger, for shouting, for threats. None came. The humans did not whisper to each other. They did not raise their voices. One by one, in perfect calm, they stood. The sound of chairs moving echoed briefly in the chamber. Then, without looking back, they turned and walked toward the exit. No speech. No warning. No last words. At first, laughter followed them. Someone joked that humans were finally learning when to quit. But as the heavy doors closed behind the last human, the laughter faded. Silence filled the chamber, thick and uncomfortable. The Alliance speaker cleared their throat and declared the session complete. Across the galaxy, the decision spread fast. News networks replayed the human walkout again and again, calling it surrender. Analysts appeared on screens, confidently declaring that humanity had finally been put in its place. Markets adjusted immediately. Contracts with Earth were cancelled. Ships rerouted. Human goods were replaced. On border worlds, Alliance officials quietly withdrew protection from human colonies, calling it strategic necessity. And Earth said nothing. No emergency broadcasts came from the human homeworld. No angry speeches from leaders. No fleets mobilized in public view. Earth's channels went quiet. To the galaxy, this confirmed everything. Humanity was finished. But deep beneath Earth's surface, far from satellites and cameras, the silence meant something else entirely. Buried facilities older than most galactic civilizations received a signal written in code few living humans had ever seen. Ancient systems powered on smoothly, without alarms, without dramatic lights. Artificial intelligences designed after humanity's darkest wars reviewed scenarios that had been marked unlikely for centuries. The status changed to active. Far below oceans, structures embedded in the planet's crust adjusted, unlocking systems sealed long ago. In deep space, far beyond normal sensor range, stations believed abandoned corrected their positions. Massive shapes hidden in gravitational shadows began to move, slowly and precisely. On Earth's surface, life continued. People went to work. Children went to school. Streets remained calm. Humanity had learned long ago that panic solved nothing. In quiet rooms beneath mountains, human commanders gathered around simple tables, reading reports in silence. No shouting. No celebration. Only confirmation. This moment had been planned for since humanity first reached the stars. Humans remembered their own history too well. They remembered being underestimated. They remembered wars started because others believed humans would not respond. They remembered extinction nearly wiping them out more than once. From those memories, humanity had learned a hard lesson. Never show your full strength unless you are prepared to use it. Never speak loudly when patience will reveal the truth. An ancient protocol name appeared on screens across secure facilities. Simple words. Heavy meaning. Final contingency. It did not mean revenge. It did not mean conquest. It meant humanity would no longer rely on anyone else for survival. It meant Earth would stop asking for permission to exist. Above the planet, space looked quiet. Empty. To the Alliance, it looked like weakness. To humanity, it looked like the perfect beginning. As the galaxy celebrated Earth's isolation, ancient human preparations reached their final stages. Earth did not cry out. Earth did not threaten. Earth prepared. And while the Alliance believed it had ended humanity's rise, it had unknowingly given humanity the one thing it needed most. Time. After the vote, the galaxy moved on quickly, almost eagerly, as if erasing humanity would make everything simpler. News networks filled the space once occupied by human voices with confident experts and smiling commentators. They replayed the moment the human delegates walked out, slowing it down, adding captions that called it acceptance, defeat, maturity. Analysts spoke in calm tones about how sanctions would force Earth to comply or collapse. They predicted internal human conflict, economic failure, maybe even civil war. The idea that humans would resist no longer seemed possible to them. Across Alliance space, trade hubs removed human signage. Ports cancelled human docking permissions. Long-standing partnerships were ended with polite messages that used careful words but carried sharp intent. On the outer edges of galactic territory, human colonies felt the change first. Supply ships stopped coming. Shared defense patrols vanished. Alliance officials withdrew without explanation, leaving entire populations suddenly alone. Families watched the stars, waiting for help that never arrived. And still, Earth said nothing. That silence spread like a shadow. At first, it felt comforting to the Alliance. No protests meant no trouble. No fleets meant no threat. But soon, small problems began to appear, the kind that were easy to ignore at first. Shipping delays grew longer. Navigation errors increased along routes once stabilized by human systems. Medical stations quietly reported shortages of specialized equipment only humans produced efficiently. These were written off as temporary issues, blamed on transition periods and market shifts. No one wanted to admit dependence on a species they had just dismissed. Then came the meeting that would change everything. Several mid-tier alliance powers gathered privately to discuss security concerns near former human trade zones. Officially, they claimed to be preventing piracy and unrest. Unofficially, they saw opportunity. Human space was quiet. Human fleets were invisible. Human defenses appeared non-existent. To them, this was proof that Earth had folded inward, too divided to respond. They convinced themselves that taking control of a few systems would be easy, even helpful. The plan was approved quietly, without a full council vote. A coalition fleet was assembled, modern and confident, filled with officers who had grown up hearing that humans were clever but weak, emotional but fragile. As the fleet moved out, they broadcast openly, proud of their mission. Jokes were shared across command channels. Some officers mocked how empty human space looked on their sensors. Not even a goodbye, one captain laughed. They finally understood. As they crossed into former human territory, nothing happened. No warnings. No challenges. No patrols. Empty stations drifted silently, lights off, doors sealed. It looked abandoned, like a civilization that had simply stepped aside. The fleet advanced deeper, confidence growing with every quiet kilometer. What they did not know was that they were being watched. Not from nearby. From everywhere. Human observation arrays hidden beyond known physics tracked every ship, every signal, every shift in formation. Data flowed back to Earth through channels the Alliance had never mapped, never imagined. On Earth, no alarms rang. No emergency meetings were called. Human commanders sat calmly, watching projections align with predictions written centuries ago. This was not chaos. This was confirmation. Humanity had always known that isolation would invite attack. That was why the silence mattered. It forced the galaxy to reveal its intentions without human provocation. As the coalition fleet moved deeper, subtle changes began. Communication delays appeared, just seconds at first. Navigation updates came back incomplete. Engineers ran checks and found nothing wrong. Systems reported normal operation. Commanders told themselves this was just deep space interference, nothing more. They pressed on. Earth did not respond. The silence remained absolute. To the invaders, it felt like mercy. To humanity, it was patience reaching its limit. Deep beneath Earth's surface, strategic models updated in real time. Probability curves tightened. The final variable had been confirmed. The galaxy had not wanted peace. It had wanted advantage. And now, the price of that belief was about to be paid. As the coalition fleet advanced, a quiet understanding settled over human command. This was no longer about sanctions or mockery. This was about survival. Humanity had been tested once again, and once again, the galaxy had chosen to see silence as weakness. The stars ahead looked empty and safe to the invaders. To Earth, they looked exactly like the place where everything would change as the coalition fleet pushed farther into what it believed was empty human territory. The galaxy crossed a point it could never return from. Part 3 did not begin with weapons fire or dramatic alarms. It began with doubt, slow and uncomfortable, growing inside minds that had expected victory. At first, it was small things. Navigation markers drifted slightly out of alignment. Star positions did not match charts perfectly. Gravity readings shifted just enough to force constant correction. Engineers ran system checks again and again, each time reporting that everything was normal. That was what frightened the experienced officers most. Nothing was broken, yet nothing felt right. Communication between ships began to stretch. Voices arrived late. Commands echoed back with slight delays. Not enough to cause panic, but enough to cause irritation. Commanders blamed distance and deep space interference. They reminded their crews that human space was undeveloped, poorly maintained. They told themselves this was proof of humanity's weakness, not a trap. Still, a quiet tension crept in. Far beyond their sensors, in regions the Alliance had never fully mapped, human observation platforms adjusted parameters with perfect precision. These platforms were old, some built before humanity ever joined the galaxy, designed during a time when humans believed the universe itself might turn hostile. They did not broadcast. They did not glow. They simply watched. Every movement of the coalition fleet was tracked, predicted, and compared against models written centuries earlier. On Earth, human command centers remained silent and focused. Officers spoke in low voices, confirming data streams that matched historical simulations almost perfectly. No one celebrated. No one hesitated. This was not a surprise attack. It was a scenario humanity had prepared for since the first time it was underestimated among the stars. As the coalition fleet advanced, its outer vessels began to drift out of formation. Not violently. Gently. Auto-correction systems worked harder to maintain alignment. Fuel consumption increased. Heat levels rose. Still, no human ships appeared. No warnings were sent. That silence pressed harder than any threat. Some younger officers finally voiced concern. They asked why Earth had not responded at all, not even to warn them away. Their superiors dismissed the questions sharply, saying fear made people imagine enemies that were not there. Those words would later haunt the survivors. Without warning, one ship at the edge of the formation lost contact with the fleet network. Not destroyed. Not jammed. Simply gone from shared tracking. Its captain reported strange sensor readings, stars shifting in impossible ways. Before assistance could be sent, the signal cut off. Panic flickered, then was forced back down by command authority. One ship meant nothing, they said. Then a second ship dropped from formation. Then a third. No explosions. No debris. Just absence. The truth finally began to take shape, heavy and terrifying. Humanity was not hiding. Humanity had changed the battlefield itself. Space around them was no longer neutral. It was being shaped, guided, and restricted by human technology so subtle it felt like nature. Ancient Terran systems, developed after humanity's own near-extinction wars, manipulated space-time gently, denying enemies clean lines of attack or retreat. Humans had learned long ago that the safest war was the one where the enemy never truly got to fight. Fear spread now, uncontrolled. Commanders ordered retreat. Hyperdrives failed to lock onto known coordinates. Emergency jumps collapsed before forming. Distress calls sent back toward Alliance space returned unanswered, swallowed by layers of interference no one could identify or bypass. The fleet was no longer advancing. It was contained. Completely. Inside human command, silence remained. This was the moment humanity had waited for, not with excitement, but with grim acceptance. The galaxy had proven its intentions without being pushed. It had chosen advantage over fairness, mockery over caution. Humanity had learned, long before reaching the stars, that survival sometimes required letting others expose themselves fully. The coalition fleet now floated in controlled darkness, surrounded by forces it could not see, inside a system that no longer belonged to it. One terrified alien commander finally whispered a truth that spread quietly across the trapped ships. They did not stop us, because they could not. His voice shook. They let us come this far, because they wanted us to understand. And still, across every channel, across every star, humanity said nothing at all. Fear stopped hiding behind confidence and discipline completely shattered. The coalition fleet finally understood that the silence was not emptiness, it was ownership. Space itself felt wrong now, heavy and resistant, as if every movement required permission that would never be given. Engines burned harder for smaller corrections. Power systems drained faster than physics allowed. Navigation officers stared at screens that insisted everything was stable while reality clearly was not. Orders were repeated again and again, voices growing sharper, then desperate, as captains realized they were no longer commanding ships, only riding them. A coordinated retreat was ordered, a simple pullback toward known space, but the command never completed. Hyperdrive windows flickered and collapsed. Jump coordinates refused to lock. Ships drifted out of alignment not violently, but helplessly, like leaves caught in slow water. Panic spread openly now. Then the darkness ahead changed. Massive shapes appeared where nothing had been moments before. No bright arrival. No energy surge. They were simply there. Human warships. Colossal, angular, ancient. Their hulls were scarred and dark, carrying the weight of centuries. These were not ships built to impress or threaten. They were built to finish things. Coalition sensors struggled to process them. Threat scales failed. Targeting systems could not decide where to aim because the ships did not move like normal vessels. They held position with terrifying certainty. The fleet tried to respond. Weapons powered up and shut down instantly. Not damaged. Not jammed. Overridden. Command codes flowed through systems that had once trusted human upgrades and shared standards. Humanity was not breaking in. It was already inside. That realization broke morale completely. Some captains shouted orders that no one could follow. Others fell silent, staring through observation windows at human ships drifting past like silent judges. No transmission came demanding surrender. No warning was given. That was worse. Humanity did not need permission or compliance. It already had control. Finally, a single signal appeared across the coalition fleet. Not a speech. Not a threat. A simple identification confirming that the region was under human authority and all hostile movement was denied. That was all. The message carried no emotion, but its meaning crushed hope. Humanity was not here to fight. Humanity was here to decide outcomes. Across the fleet, fear deepened into something heavier, understanding. These humans had not responded quickly because speed was never required. They had allowed the coalition to advance, to commit fully, to cross lines that could not be denied later. This was not a reaction. It was a conclusion. On Earth, commanders watched calmly as projections matched predictions written centuries earlier. Every response aligned perfectly with the old simulations. Humanity had learned long ago that when it appeared weak, it would be hunted. This moment confirmed it again. The coalition fleet was not destroyed. Not yet. It was held, powerless, surrounded by silent proof of what true strength looked like. That mercy cut deeper than any weapon. It forced realization without allowing escape. Space itself seemed to settle into a new order as human ships locked into their final positions. The invaders had walked into Earth's patience and found no exit. And still, humanity did not speak. Fear had changed again. It was no longer sharp panic or wild confusion. It became heavy, slow, and crushing, settling deep into every mind aboard the trapped coalition fleet. Ships floated in enforced stillness, engines locked at idle, weapons silent, crews moving carefully as if loud footsteps might make things worse. Time lost meaning. Minutes stretched into hours. Hours blurred together. No explosions came. No final assault. That waiting was the true punishment. Humanity did not need to destroy them to prove power. Control was enough. Coalition captains tried to restore order, speaking calmly over internal channels, reminding crews of training and duty, but their words sounded hollow even to themselves. Every attempt to regain authority failed quietly. Systems accepted commands politely and then ignored them. Engineers worked until exhaustion, tearing through code layers they had trusted all their careers, only to find deeper frameworks they did not recognize, written in human logic and human restraint. The truth spread from ship to ship, whispered first, then spoken openly. Humanity had not taken control today. Humanity had been inside their systems for years, maybe decades, through shared technology, cooperative upgrades, and standard protocols everyone assumed were safe. This was not a trap sprung in anger. It was a door that had always been unlocked, waiting for someone arrogant enough to walk through. Human warships drifted closer now, not aggressively, just enough to be unmistakable. Their hulls told stories without words, scars from battles fought long before humanity joined the galactic stage, conflicts no one else remembered because humans had survived them alone. Coalition crews watched in silence, realizing these ships were not rushed constructions built for show. They were old, refined, tested by extinction-level wars. Some crew members began to cry quietly. Others stared without blinking, their belief systems collapsing under the weight of what they had misunderstood. A transmission finally opened across the trapped fleet. Not a threat. Not a demand. A calm human voice spoke evenly, clearly, without pride or anger. It stated that the coalition fleet had violated human sovereign space under false claims of security. It stated that no civilians would be harmed. It stated that crews would receive food, medical care, and communication with families. Then came the line that broke what remained of their resolve. Responsibility would rest entirely on leadership. Not a single word more. The channel closed. That mercy was unbearable. There was no enemy to hate, no cruelty to justify retaliation. Humanity was not acting like a monster. It was acting like a judge. Across the galaxy, delayed reports finally began slipping through channels humanity allowed to remain open. Fleets missing. Systems unreachable. Trade routes frozen without explanation. Panic erupted at the highest levels of the Alliance. Emergency councils formed overnight, filled with shouting, accusations, and fear. Species that had voted for sanctions turned on each other, blaming rivals for pushing too far. Some demanded immediate apologies to Earth. Others screamed for retaliation they could not organize. All of them felt the same truth closing in. They had mistaken restraint for weakness, and now restraint had turned into consequence. On Earth, there were no celebrations. No cheering crowds. Human commanders stood in quiet rooms, watching the captured fleet on projection screens. Some looked tired. Others looked distant, remembering stories passed down through generations, times when humanity itself had been surrounded, judged, and nearly erased. This was why the orders were strict. No unnecessary suffering. No public humiliation. No destruction beyond what was required. Earth's vengeance was not rage. It was a boundary finally enforced. As the coalition fleet remained trapped, alive but powerless, the galaxy began to understand what humanity had unleashed. Not fire. Not conquest. Accountability. And that realization spread faster than any weapon ever could, reaching even the worlds that had laughed the loudest when Earth went quiet. The galaxy was no longer arguing about whether humanity was dangerous. That question had already been answered. What terrified everyone now was something far worse: humanity was reasonable. The shock spread in quiet waves, not through explosions or burning worlds, but through collapsed governments and broken lies. Evidence began to surface across Alliance space, released carefully and methodically through channels no one could block. Records of secret votes, corrupt agreements, private messages where leaders mocked humans while planning to profit from their isolation. None of it was dramatized. None of it was framed as revenge. It was simply shown, raw and undeniable. One by one, trusted leaders fell. Some resigned in shame. Others were removed by their own people when the truth became impossible to deny. Courts reopened cases long buried. Prison doors opened for the innocent. Entire power structures crumbled, not because humanity demanded it, but because they could no longer stand under the weight of truth. Civilians across dozens of worlds felt something strange and confusing, relief mixed with fear. Humanity was not punishing populations. It was removing the people who had decided their lives were acceptable collateral. That restraint forced the galaxy to look inward. In human-controlled space, commanders received updated directives from Earth's highest authority, words written centuries ago but never fully used. Restraint above all else. Protect civilians. Avoid spectacle. Make the lesson impossible to misunderstand but impossible to twist into hatred. Younger officers struggled with this. Anger burned in them, anger at the laughter, the sanctions, the abandonment of human colonies. Older commanders guided them quietly, reminding them of humanity's own history, of times when rage had nearly destroyed Earth itself. This was why humans waited. This was why they prepared. Rage felt powerful in the moment, but it poisoned the future. The captured coalition fleet remained intact, floating under silent watch. Crews were treated with care. Medical teams were allowed aboard. Food and supplies were delivered without ceremony. Families were allowed to communicate. That mercy shattered the last defense the invaders had built in their minds. They could no longer pretend humans were cruel monsters. They had to face the truth, that they themselves had been the aggressors. Testimonies were recorded. Not interrogations. Conversations. Human officers asked calm questions and listened without judgment. Lies collapsed quickly when no one argued back. The truth spread outward, and with it came something many species had not felt in generations: shame. Across the galaxy, children watched broadcasts of leaders apologizing publicly, not to humanity, but to their own people. The narrative of human weakness collapsed completely, replaced by a far more unsettling understanding. Humans were patient. Humans endured pressure without reacting. Humans prepared quietly while others laughed loudly. And when humans finally acted, they did so with discipline that reshaped reality without burning it down. Earth transmitted again, this time to the entire galaxy. No dramatic visuals. No threatening music. Just a calm human voice, clear and steady, translated into every known language. Humanity did not seek empire. Humanity did not seek domination. Humanity sought survival without humiliation. The message explained that the sanctions, mockery, and invasion attempt had crossed a line drawn long ago after humanity's darkest wars. That line existed so no species would ever again be forced to fight for existence. The transmission ended with a single statement that echoed across every world. Earth's vengeance was not unleashed to destroy the galaxy. It was unleashed to make sure no one would ever again believe humanity could be hunted without consequence. When the signal ended, something remarkable happened. There was no laughter, no denial, no mocking response. The galaxy listened. And in that shared silence, so similar to the one humanity had chosen at the beginning, a new truth took root. Power did not belong to those who spoke the loudest or struck first. Power belonged to those who could wait, endure, and still choose restraint after victory was already assured. Humanity had been underestimated once. It would not be underestimated again. The galaxy no longer felt like the same place it had been before humanity went silent. Something fundamental had shifted, not just in power, but in thinking. Worlds that once spoke loudly now chose words carefully. Councils that once laughed now paused before every vote. The captured coalition fleet remained under human control, not as prisoners, but as witnesses. Crews lived, worked, and waited. Surrounded by a calm that felt heavier than chains. Human ships did not loom threateningly anymore. They simply existed nearby, steady and patient, a constant reminder that force did not need to shout to be absolute. Among the coalition crews, conversations changed. Fear turned inward. Officers who once mocked humanity now replayed the past again and again, realizing how many chances Earth had given the galaxy to stop. Silence was not absence. It was a warning no one respected. Human officers continued their quiet interviews, not to humiliate, but to understand. They listened to stories of ambition, greed, and fear, of leaders who believed taking from humans would be easy because humans would hesitate. Every confession added another layer to the truth humanity already knew. On Earth, citizens watched these developments with mixed emotions. Some felt anger finally finding release. Others felt sadness that it had come to this at all. Elders spoke often in public forums, reminding younger generations why humanity chose restraint even now. They spoke of Earth's own past, of times when victory had turned into regret, when domination had created enemies that lasted centuries. Humanity had learned that winning was easy. Living with the consequences was not. Across Alliance space, new governments formed under pressure from their own people. Leaders ran on promises of transparency and caution, not dominance. The idea of unchecked power became something feared instead of admired. In schools and academies, the story of humanity's silence began to be taught not as a military lesson, but a moral one. Students learned that strength without patience led to destruction, and patience without strength invited extinction. Humanity had found the narrow path between them. Trade resumed slowly under new agreements that respected Earth as an equal, not a resource. Borders reopened with safeguards written by human legal minds, designed to prevent manipulation rather than enable control. Humanity did not demand tribute or apologies. It demanded understanding. That demand was harder to satisfy than fear. Then humanity spoke again, not through a broadcast, but through action. The coalition fleet was released in stages, escorted safely out of human-controlled space. Ships returned intact. Crews returned alive. Command structures were dissolved, not as punishment, but as consequence. The galaxy watched closely, waiting for a hidden threat that never came. That mercy reshaped everything. It proved humanity did not act out of hatred. It acted out of memory. Among the returning crews, one phrase spread quietly, repeated in mess halls and private conversations, then carried back to home worlds. Humans are not dangerous because they are violent. Humans are dangerous because they remember. They remember every time they were underestimated, every time silence was mistaken for weakness. And they prepare so that it never happens twice. By the end of Part 7, the galaxy stood at a crossroads. It could cling to old habits of arrogance and dominance, or it could learn from the species it had almost pushed into war. Humanity did not force that choice. It simply waited, calm and unshaken, confident that the lesson had been learned. And for the first time since the Alliance was formed, the galaxy feared not humanity's weapons, but humanity's judgment. The galaxy had finally slowed down. Not because it was safe, and not because it was peaceful, but because it was careful. The age of loud power had ended quietly. Humanity did not announce that ending. It simply stood there, steady and unmoved, while everything else adjusted around it. The former Galactic Alliance still existed in name, but it no longer felt like an empire of certainty. It felt like a reminder of what arrogance could cost. Councils met with fewer voices and longer pauses. Votes were no longer rushed. Every decision now carried the unspoken question, what would humanity see in this? Not out of fear of attack, but fear of consequence. The released coalition fleet returned to their home systems changed beyond repair. Officers who once stood tall now spoke softly. Some resigned the moment they arrived home, unable to carry the weight of what they had seen. Others stayed, determined to make sure their worlds never repeated the same mistake. Stories spread quietly from ship to ship, then world to world. Not stories of destruction, but of restraint. Of human ships that could have erased fleets and chose not to. Of human commanders who listened instead of shouted. Of a species that had every reason to burn the galaxy and instead forced it to look at itself. On Earth, there were no monuments built to celebrate victory. No parades. No holidays. Life continued as it always had, busy, imperfect, human. But something had changed in the way people looked at the stars. There was no hunger for conquest there. Only a calm awareness that humanity no longer needed approval to exist among them. Parents told their children why Earth had gone silent, why it had waited, why it had finally acted. They explained that strength did not come from proving others wrong, but from surviving long enough to choose restraint when no one expected it. That lesson became part of humanity's identity, carried forward quietly, just like its power. Slowly, the galaxy rebuilt itself around a new truth. Trade returned under fair terms. Borders were respected not because humans demanded it, but because everyone remembered what happened when they were not. Conflicts still happened, disagreements still formed, but escalation became rare. Someone would always remember Earth's silence, and discussions would cool before turning dangerous. Humanity did not become the ruler of the galaxy. It became its measure. A point of reference. A line no one wanted to cross again. In distant systems, elders began telling a story that would outlive them. They spoke of the time humans were laughed at, sanctioned, and abandoned. Of the moment Earth went quiet and the galaxy celebrated too early. And of what followed, not fire, not annihilation, but judgment wrapped in patience. The story always ended the same way, with a lesson no one ever forgot. Humanity was never weak. Humanity was waiting. And when it finally moved, it did not unleash vengeance to destroy the galaxy. It unleashed it to end the era where survival depended on being louder, crueler, or faster to strike. The stars did not belong to the strongest anymore. They belonged to those who understood restraint. And in that new, careful galaxy, humanity stood exactly where it had earned the right to stand, not feared, not worshipped, but respected. Silent when it chose to be. Unstoppable when it had to be.